All right. So this week we're going to talk about primarily personal loans and different types of loans. Actually, a little bit into home loans as well. Pretty interesting stuff. The big picture in terms of the course. Next week I'll do a regular lecture plus a little bonus thing about the midterm. So the way the midterm works, it should not be high threat to you. I'll have the questions in front of me. I'm not going to, give you the questions, but I'm going to definitely narrow down your study search, and it's legitimate because we'll concentrate just on the important bits. I know we talk about a lot of things, some of them kind of random, but some of them pretty important. So on the exams, I try to focus on the important things and give you an idea of what is the critical bits that will definitely impact your success in terms of personal finance. So that should make things a little better. And multiple choice, I mean, again, it's really the only way to do it, because otherwise, objective stuff and with GPT and the rest of who we fooling, you guys give me essay answers and whatever. I'd rather have a computer score it if you're going to have a computer write it. So anyway, we'll stick with a multiple choice format and it'll be good. So personal loans. So again, there's different people in personal finance, some of which, again, I don't want to badmouth the guy, but there's a guy, Dave Ramsey, who's super popular and he makes millions and millions of dollars. And to tell you the truth, he makes millions of dollars because he invests. He makes money in the traditional way that, nobody ever got rich working, by the hour, basically. There's, it's the same story. The poor spend, the middle class save, and the rich, or the people who aspire to be rich, they invest. And so Dave Ramsey on his show will talk about you need to be completely debt free. You need to not, wait till you have cash to pay for things and all that, which is good advice if you lack the discipline and you're going to let the debt get away from you. But when it comes to his personal situation, he's pretty wealthy, and he's not. I'm sure he's invariably he's used a lot of borrowed money to get there. Now, again, using the money to your advantage versus being used by a creditor, they're obviously two different things. So in terms of personal loans, for the most part, these type of loans are more of a utility. They're not a money-making option. You're accepting the fact that you're going to spend some money on credit fees and interest and the rest of that, and it's not a winning situation. From a bigger picture, from an investing standpoint, if you're using borrowed money for investments, as in real estate, it can actually be quite fortuitous and quite smart and advantageous. To use borrowed money to buy, say, crypto, not a good idea. Use borrowed money to buy even in the stock market. The broader term that means the same thing is called leverage. If you're leveraging your accounts, you're essentially using borrowed money. And with volatile assets, that's a recipe for disaster, because the volatility, like I say, with Bitcoin or Solana or some of these other crypto things, when they go up and down, it really doesn't matter to me because I'm not selling. But if I was leveraged, if I had borrowed money, the magnitude of those swings up and down would be such that I would get wiped out. You would get what they call a margin call, and that's bad. The gist of the way it works with securities, when you're borrowing money for most investments, is the underlying asset is your collateral, and there are certain collateral requirements, meaning you have to have a certain amount of money in your account to keep that loan secured. If you don't, you have to add more cash to it. So let's say you do something like, I've owned Tesla before. I actually shorted at one point, but I'm not a huge fan of Tesla, but neither here nor there. Let's say Tesla's trading for, I don't even know what it's trading for. Let's say it's trading for $400, and you go all in and use borrowed money to buy even more Tesla. And the margin requirement is 50%, meaning that if you want to buy, $1 million worth of Tesla, you got to put up $500,000 worth of cash, and then the other 500 is on margin. Well, let's say Tesla doesn't go the way you want. Let's say the Tesla stock drops by 10%. Well, that's $50,000. And the broker at this point will go, wait a minute, you need to maintain 50% of the value in your account. And that 50% was the stock that was being held by Tesla. That's now only worth $450,000. You got to come up with another 50 grand like now, because you're below the margin requirements. So they give you a margin call. You now have the chance to add that 50 grand, and get your cash equivalency back up to the 500,000 that you borrowed, because you borrowed in dollars. So they're only interested in you getting back up to $500,000. If you can't, then they liquidate you. There's the margin call gets executed, and they sell your shares at the prevailing price. And obviously, since the stock wasn't doing well, you get stopped out at the bottom and you get wrecked. So, and what I proposed there was not that heavy of margin. I mean, you see some crypto scams where they're 10x leverage, meaning a dime's movement in the price of that underlying commodity, which is super volatile, will result in 10 times that amount, so $1 worth of movement. So anyway, all kinds of things. We're already way down the rabbit hole on this stuff, but what my point is that sometimes loans are used just out of utility. Sometimes loans are used directly for an investment, and then other times, it's just to categorize all loans as being bad is wrong. Is what I'm saying. Credit can be your friend if you know how to use it, or you can be a slave to credit if you end up on the other end of it. So where do you get money for loans? So commercial banks, saving institutions, credit unions, finance companies. So again, they're looking at small time kind of personal loans. Here's a family type thing. Yeah, you can do that once in a while. For me, that they don't have listed here, my go-to is borrowing against my own savings, borrowing against my 401k in my retirement accounts. I use this for everything. I don't use it so much anymore because I've got, I'm actually in a different phase where I'm starting to, pull money out of the retirement accounts just to spend, because I don't get penalized any longer. But up until you're age 59 and a half, if you have money in your retirement account and you want to withdraw it, and that's not what I'm talking about when I'm saying taking a loan. If you flat pull the money out of that retirement account, you get, number one, a 10% penalty, because you can't do that. It's not legal. 59 and a half. So you're going to accept that 10% penalty right off the top. And then also that money that was tax deferred is now going to be fully taxed, so it's going to be added to your income and you're going to be taken. So don't do that. Don't say, the instructor said, hey, take a loan against your 401k, and then you go in there and ask for a withdrawal. A withdrawal and a loan are two separate things. So this way, I've done it online, and not that it's the most dangerous, safest thing, but I've actually done, on my smartphone, driving down the road, where you go to the website, you go to the loan option on your 401k, and you type in how much money you want, and boom, a check shows up in about 4 or 5 days. No, or actually you can do an electronic transfer, but there's no applications because it's your money, and the money's going to go back into your account. Now, there are limits. You can, and they're actually set by the company you have the 401k with. Maybe some federal government, because they do seem to be sort of uniform. But typically the limits are $50,000 or half of what your balance is. They don't want you, if you only got 50,000 in your 401k, you can't take all of it. Normally, in that case, you can only take 25. But anyway, when I used to sell a lot of horse equipment and other stuff, I would take that loan out, and you set the terms on when you want it to be paid back up until typically 5 years, I think, is the length that the longest they'll let you go. But you can set it shorter. And it was just a payroll deduction. Came right back out like a 401k kind of thing. And it was seamless and no drama. So anyway, don't forget about that. There's certain, they'll say disadvantages, but they're not that significant. If you pull the money out of your investments, obviously if the investments are growing, you're not going to participate in that because that money is not in that account at that moment. That money is added back in as you make the payments. And again, you're making these interest payments to yourself again. So it's pretty slick. So I don't know why more people don't do it. Big fan of that. Peer-to-peer stuff, this has been out there for a while. What happens is, a lot of times, if you say have a business you want to start up, and you go to a bank to get a loan, don't be surprised. You've been waiting, you've got your business idea, and the last stage is to get funding, and you find out that the banks are typically not interested in loaning to small businesses that are brand new. You're incredibly risky because most small businesses fail. And so a lot of times you have a tough time getting a loan. Well, in peer-to-peer lending, what they do is they get a bunch of investors, and let's say, they have two groups of people. One, the borrowers, the people who are applying to these companies, and I think I want to say Prosper and Cabbage and a couple of these other companies that you may have heard of that are out there. But anyway, they've got one big pool of borrowers and then another big pool of investors. And so let's say I'm looking to get, above average yields. And so, again, the interest rates on this are not going to be super cheap because the investors who are investing, they want to get a better than normal return. So let's say they're trying to get, 8-9% return. Well, obviously, these companies got to loan out that money at, 9-10% at least. They got to have a little higher rate. But anyway, let's say you invest some money with this company, and their pitch to you is that we're going to loan this money out to small businesses and stuff. But don't worry about the risk because we're going to spread it. We're going to diversify. So you're going to give us, say, $1,000, and we're going to divide that $1,000 up into, say, $10 increments. And we're going to loan that across, literally thousands of companies. So although there's a propensity for certain businesses to fail and sometimes these loans not to be repaid, we're going to have you involved in these little micro loans to all kinds of different companies. And so it's sort of the insurance model where, some people may have a bad day, but you're not all going to have a bad day at once. And so their business model is that they've diversified they've spread your risk across, and it becomes a better investment. So anyway, these things were just kind of coming in vogue when these guys wrote their book, and so that's what they're talking about. But if you're a small business and you're trying to get a loan, that may be one option. Personally, I don't like to use borrowed money to start a business because I think I have the greatest ideas ever and they don't take off. And if I was highly, in debt doing this, it'd be the last small business I'd ever be able to start. I'd rather, what I've done is, start a small venture business and, granted, it takes a little longer, but have it be self-funding. And if it's a viable option, it will work. I mean, granted, not all businesses can go that way. If you're trying to start a brew pub or something like that, or a restaurant or something, there's really you can't start out of a food truck, really. I guess you could, but you pretty much got to invest in that physical plant before you can get going. But If it's something like what I was doing, like equipment sales, you start out small, take some small loans through the 401k. I always kept my loans under 50 grand. I'd buy a few truckloads of equipment. I'd sell that, make some money, buy more truckloads, and then, it worked out. It was viable. So the only reason I quit was, I kind of saturated the market. I sold a ton of stuff there for a while. And one of my daughters was going to Auburn University, so they got the majority of that money. Fair enough, whatever. It was, good gig. I think I had like 3 different things going at that time, so it can be done. And if I really was serious about it, I probably could have opened up a farm supply store. There's another guy, I know a guy who did that, and it seems to be a going venture, but that's not what I aspire to do. Running a small retail store is, especially when somebody like Tractor Supply or somebody like that could come in and just gobble you up in a heartbeat. So that wasn't what I wanted to do. Anyway, determine whether a loan is sensible. So now we're back in this sort of utility phase of getting a loan. And this is for a particular thing. Let's say you need a vehicle, your vehicle is, you maybe have children, they need to get around. You need a vehicle for quality of life. You need a vehicle to get back to your job, no vehicle, no job. Yeah, so it kind of makes sense. But again, do you need a, $90,000 truck, or do you need transportation? So maybe you can get both. Maybe you can just go with a non-brand new one, and if the maintenance costs can be controlled, if you have those sort of skills, or can find something maybe that's just a couple years old. But anyway, ways to do it. Also, there's a number of cars out there that are absolute garbage. There's a number of cars that don't even make it 50,000 miles that are just... Anyway, I'm not going to single out certain brands, but yeah, you need to look at the resale value of a vehicle before you invest too, because sometimes they're not a lot of good stuff out there. And then, keep in mind that when you start taking these loans, it's going to impact. If you're trying to set aside money for investing, but you're mired with all these loans, it's going to make things tough, especially student loans. Get by with what you need to. By all means, if you can get through college quicker by taking a loan and focusing on school, but make sure you're disciplined in that and don't become just swamped in debt. Application process. So some of these things that we talked about before, most everybody's going to have their own proprietary forms, but since you hopefully have sort of a template or some sort of form, maybe you've even prepared, where you stand, and you know whether you should be able to get a loan, and you're just basically transferring the amounts from your personal sheets to the online or whatever form it is they're looking for. The contract, amount of the loan, and the interest rate. And so the interest rate always an APR, annual percentage rate. So don't be confused by some sort of teaser kind of rate. You want to look somewhere on that loan is going to be APR, and APR is the number when you're comparing what your options are. Amortization, that's just how the payments are going to be done. Series of equal payments, so it's an installment plan, typically something that's secured by collateral, right? Your personal loans, this may be for personal things, but a lot of times when people say personal loans or signature loans, they're talking about loans that are unsecured. Unsecured loans, because they represent greater risk to the lender, are going to be at a higher interest rate. So not something you necessarily want to do. It sucks to have your house tied to the loan, but again, that's why I've always started small businesses and let them kind of self-fund, because I didn't want to put my domicile at risk. Maturity, smaller payments. So try to have the payments match. When I was in Spain, they had mortgages because Spanish real estate prices were just screaming. and it was an unstable situation. I took my money, I got the hell out of there. But anyway, people towards the end when I was getting ready to sell, I was only there 3 years, but they were taking out 60-year mortgages. I just took out a 30-year mortgage. I don't know that I'm going to be here 30 years from now, but whatever. The bank thinks I will, so good on them. But for real estate, it's quite common to do. But in Spain, for example, these people in their 40s and 50s taking out 60-year mortgages. You have a child. It's like, welcome to the family. Here's our loan, because that's what's going to happen. Anyway, but the Spanish market, when I say it was unsustainable, they said Spanish real estate was going up 17% a year. The home prices went up 17%. So like I said, I had my house 3 years. And so all I did was get the purchase price that I paid for that home and multiply it by, I think I used 45%, so 1.45. So anyway, 45% profit, and I sold it in 4 days and left and bought a house in Germany. But subsequent to that, 2 years later, actually it wasn't even 2 years later, the Spanish market just tanked. So if something's too good a deal, you kind of sense that you're at the top and things aren't making sense. Yeah, a lot of times it's, take some profits, take some money off the table, and in terms of like crypto, I will not be in crypto a year from now because it goes in cycles, and I'm going to try and guess the top, but a year from now, I'm going to be jumping out. I'm not going to ride the wave. It's like a big roller coaster, and you buy the dip. I will sell everything, put it all on the side, and wait for the next dip to happen. So anyway, everybody's got their own strategies. So collateral, I've hit that pretty hard. Collateral, secured loan, those are good things. Collateral means that repossession can happen. Repo Man. I don't know if you guys have seen that movie. It's out on YouTube for free right now. It's kind of whatever. Words to live by. Unsecured loan, not backed by collateral. So it's going to be a higher interest rate. That lender doesn't have anything to fall back upon. So co-signing. Co-signing is just not a good idea. Okay, so what happens is, let's say you, or you, more than likely your friend, has kind of flaky credit. It goes to buy something, and they say, no, your credit sucks. We're not loaning you any money. And they say, but if you can get a co-signer. So they come to you and they say, hey, will you, you're my buddy, will you co-sign this loan with me? And they kind of guilt you into it, and you sign it. Now what you put yourself into is a pretty bad situation, because your friend, they tried. Obviously, the reason they had bad credit is because they flaked out once before, and so perhaps they flake out again. Well, the lender, it's very time and money consuming to go after debts, and a lot of times they'll sell these things off to a collection agency. And so let's say your friend doesn't pay, and this is a year or two later, you start getting letters, phone calls, people showing up at the door from collection agencies because you had a loan with, say, some car dealer. The car dealer, there's like $20,000 that's owed. They'll sell that off to a collection agency, say for, maybe if it's good debt, maybe they'll sell it for $10,000 or $15,000, meaning that they sell this note to a collection agency, and the collection agency is entitled to collect $20,000, and they'll only have to pay, say, $15,000 for that to buy it from the other creditor, the car dealership that's selling it. So that collection agency, that's how they make their money. They usually are paying only pennies on the dollar, but anyway, they'll buy these debts and go to you, and they've got the full rights to collect upon them. And the reason they're going to come to you rather than the person who took the original loan, the person who had the vehicle or took the loan, the it makes no sense. That person didn't have much money to start out with. And so why would they even mess with trying to collect from that person? You're the one who co-signed the loan. You're the one who verified that you do have the financial resources and the ability to repay. So, time is money to these people. They're not going to waste their time with kind of a known deadbeat. They're going to come after you because you've got good credit, and since you signed on that loan, they've got full legal recourse to come after you. So if you're in a position and somebody wants to co-sign a loan, loan them the money personally. I know that's probably not something you want to do, but it's a better idea than co-signing it. If you co-sign it, you're signing yourself as a co-borrower with somebody who's has a history of not paying back. And so, anyway, lots of downsides to co-signing. So try not to get in that position. It's not a harmless type thing. Your friend needs to maybe not buy whatever they're trying to buy, or needs to get the money from someplace else, or if they're that good a friend, loan them the money outright, and don't, because if this thing's starting to go to collections, you as a co-signer may not even know it. They're going to send the late notices to your friend who actually originated the loan, and it's probably going to be in collections with extra fees and stuff added on by the time they actually come to you. So, loan application, assets, liability. So, again, kind of general stuff. Big thing is they want your socials so they can look at your FICO score. APR. So I hit on this before. That's how you compare loans. It's the only valid comparison. And there's a legal requirement, truth in lending and the rest of that, where it needs to be on the forms. You'll find different rates. You have to shop around for loans. Again, be cautious about letting everybody run your credit, because that will affect your credit score, which will again affect the interest rate that you're offered. Let's see what they got here. So, sometimes they'll have fees that will lower the interest rate. Sometimes they'll have fees and they'll still have a high interest rate. They'll have a loan origination fee, this fee, that fee, an appraisal fee, a fee for you to fill out your own credit report, an extra $50 thrown in there, and then the actual expenses. So that all kind of comes out in the wash when you do the APR. Repayment schedule. So this is kind of interesting. It becomes much more interesting as the loan gets much longer in terms, like a 30-year. This one's just spread over a course of months, but you can see the nature of loans, at least in the West. In France, they use a different model, but in the United States, you're primarily paying a lot of interest on the first payments, and not much towards the principal, the actual money that's owed. And then you can see by the end of the loan, the loan's almost paid off, you're paying just a small amount of interest, $1.76 versus $20, but you're paying correspondingly more principal, and then the loan's done. So if you look at a 30-year mortgage, these numbers are going to be in proportion the same, but you'll be paying, let's say you got a $2,000 mortgage, about $1,900 of that is going to be interest for the first couple of years. And not necessarily a bad thing the way they had that structured like that, because mortgage interest, unlike personal loan interest, mortgage interest is deductible against your taxes. So again, live within your means. These are not a good investment. I mean, I've made not tons of money, but at least broken even on just about the majority of cars I've had. But I'm not talking about, utility vehicles. My typical thing is I usually have something like a 4Runner, some sort of utility thing, and then a nice car on the side. I don't do that in Alaska because it's just a little too much climate, and I don't want to deal with roads and rocks and winter. But I always used to, when I was in Europe, I always had, either a Viper or a Corvette, and then a regular daily driver. And sometimes, I mean, I used the Viper as a daily driver, although I never had a roof on it. And go figure, it rains a lot in Germany, so it did get wet now and then. But anyway, all those though, the muscle car type things that I had, I always bought them at never new, and I always, I'd bring Corvettes from the States, keep it for a couple years or a year or two, and then sell it for a fair amount more than I bought it for. That was just a unique situation, but you can do fairly well on some of the classic cars or performance cars, but you can't do that on a daily driver. But anyway, yeah, you can save up and pay cash. You can do a different loan. The thing you got to watch out with a vehicle is that, let's say you take out a 6-year loan on your vehicle. By the end of that 6 years, your payment stays the same. The amortization, the installment payment is still the same amount, but the value of that car is not what it was. And you now probably have repair bills in addition to the car payment. So you may think, oh man, I don't mind spending $1,200 a month on a car payment. Well, you don't mind when it's a brand new car, but when it's an older vehicle now, it's 6 years old, and you've got maintenance charges as well, you may not be so in love with that situation. So buy the car you need, the vehicle you need, rather than the vehicle you want. So personal preferences, they tend to rule things, but yeah, resale value is really tough to establish in Alaska. Most states, because they've got so much interest in taxing you in terms of vehicle sales, vehicle transfers, they track that, and it's actually public knowledge. And Edmunds and Kelley Blue Book and all those other guys are able to publish pretty accurate, resale values because they get the information directly. In Alaska, it's a non-disclosure state. They don't tax on the transfer of used vehicles, so there's no legal requirement. So for them trying to establish what the price is very difficult. Plus, Alaska, there's some literally money to be made in Alaska because people don't know what things are worth. They'll either spend way too much, way too little, and anyway, so vehicle values in the state are kind of difficult to figure out. Financing rate, revised loan contracts. In some cases, for the more aggressive of you, I bought a Subaru for one of my daughters, and I bought it. I think it actually came up from California. Anyway, it didn't matter. I was kind of searching nationwide, and again, you can get ripped off by shippers, but if you shop around and go with the right company, it came up here for $1,200. I've bought a number of pieces of equipment down in Texas, and just because some of the auctions down there are quite reasonable. I've brought up horse treads. I bought up a ton of stuff. I just find Alaska prices a lot of times are kind of high, and if you've got your logistics or connections, you can sometimes. But if you go off the street and you go to get a vehicle, yeah, if they see you coming, they'll charge you $4 or $5 grand to ship a vehicle if they think they can get you to pay for it. But if you're willing to work around, you can figure it out. Kelley Blue Book, so kind of like Edmunds. Again, not the most accurate thing. The other problem with Kelley Blue Book and Edmunds and the used car dealer folks, the big, mega corporations, there's only a few anymore, so they've got such a monopoly in the area. Go figure, they've gone ahead and bought a few of these car value companies, so they're smoking their own supply. When you talk to these folks, you're getting numbers that they want you to get. So, certain vehicles. My Viper, for example, I couldn't insure it. It was literally, I could buy a new Viper, not a new, but a equivalent Viper every 2 years. They wanted $18,000 a year for insurance. But that was driving on the Autobahn, plus going up to Nürburgring, the racetrack up there and stuff like that. So I just had to go self-insured, and it was a dangerous situation, but dangerous in terms of financial if I would have crashed that thing. And there was a high propensity to crash it. There's no anti-lock brakes, no modern anything on that vehicle. It was just power. It's awesome. Anyway, so certain vehicles are going to be, quite a bit higher based upon their damage rate. Some of the EVs are incredibly hard to fix, so you might want to do a little research on that. Some sort of road hazard type thing, something flips up and hits the bottom of the vehicle and does some damage to the battery. There's some genuine horror stories that can happen, so be careful. Negotiating the price. Yep. These no haggle dealers, that just kind of cracks me up. We're going to set the price and we're going to make it easier for you. We're not going to haggle. Haggling does not involve increasing the price. When they say there are no haggle dealership, I guess that's convenient for somebody, but anyway, I don't like the whole dealership network thing anyway. I don't really participate with those folks, so I tend to buy a lot of things on auctions and stuff like that, which has got its own risk. Don't get me wrong, but you can find a lot of times there's some car dealerships that actually now are, the big one in Idaho is now part of that big car monopoly I was talking about before. But sometimes there's unique situations where it does make sense to drag something up from the lower 48. Shop around. We don't quite have the market where you're going to have the Carvana and some of these other things that are the big mega sellers of used vehicles. Anyway, I think some of those are actually out of business at this point, but in the lower 48 there's obviously more options. Just a small market up here. Yeah, decide what you can pay. Now, be very, very careful. I mean, obviously their gig is that it's that's why I don't like the car dealerships, because I find them pretty insulting. They just they pretend that I can't do math. When I say I want to come in and buy a vehicle for a certain price, they say, well, what do you want your monthly payment to be? Knowing that they'll keep my monthly payment down at whatever rate I want, even just by increasing the term of the loan. So they'll take the loan out to some stupid range, 7-8 years. I'm like, no, I want to spend this amount of money, and I'm not interested in financing it beyond the life of the vehicle. So car may be worthless by the time you pay it off. There's a lot of these European vehicles that, man, they had a lot of, for me, I've definitely found that luxury versus performance, luxury vehicles don't hold value, performance vehicles do. So again, you wouldn't want to have some of the vehicles I've had as a daily driver, but for example, I was looking at one of the Jaguars as an XKR. It's a sports car type thing, but it went for $80,000 new, and it was being sold for under 10, and it was 3 years old. That is just that's such a financial hit that you won't find that sort of depreciation in true performance cars. You will find it in luxury, because there's not a lot of status to having an older, non-classic luxury. So anyway, but some of these European makes, the repair bills and the rest of it is just, it's just catastrophic if you have a transmission or an engine failure, to the point where they're almost throwaway vehicles. Very sad, very sad. Anyway, here's how they do it with these loan payments. Granted, these are small loans, but yeah, if you stretch out the terms, you can get the payments lower, but that's you're paying more money over time. Leasing, a lot of times, especially getting back to the European vehicles, that'll be kind of their come in. And tell you the truth, if I had the necessity or the fascination where I needed one of those vehicles, I probably would lease it, just realizing that the resale is just going to be garbage. But for most of the time, leasing is just not a good idea. Think about a lease like an extended rental. You put too many miles on it, you damage that vehicle a little bit. When you go to return that car at the end of the lease period, they want some more money. Sometimes if you're in some sort of business situation where you've got some sort of write-off, but very few people are in that situation. Usually it's just a way to get more money out of you in a shorter amount of time, and then give you this feeling that, oh, you don't have to worry about selling the vehicle at the end of the term. We'll just take it back. I don't know. I haven't been through the process of trying to return a lease, but I do know there are requirements in terms of miles that are allowed, condition that's allowed, and it's essentially a long-term rental. So you don't build any equity in the car, which you're not trying to. Cars aren't an investment. Equity means, what it's worth, the value at the end. Cars are just such a crappy investment. I don't consider equity so much. You're responsible for maintenance and damages, and then, if you don't return a pristine vehicle, you may have some problems. Student loan. So I hit on this a little bit before. I really, whatever. If you can get through college and get out there and then, assuming that you're going to be making more money as a college graduate, it makes sense to take a loan but don't blindly, get mired in debts when you don't really know where you're going or what your thing is, what your goal is in life. The problem with loans is, they do add up. They delay when you can get potentially buying a house and making other investments. They also may kind of drive your life in terms of, even political decisions. I'm not going to get political, but there are certain parties that dangle this out in front of you every couple of years. It's so funny. I was talking to my nephew who went to law school, and he's got a fair amount of student loan debt, and he's going to vote a particular way because he thinks they're going to repay his student loans. It's like, that's not going to happen. I mean, that's just my personal view, but if they were going to do that, they would definitely be making a bigger deal out of it here prior to the election. Post-election, there are so many people, there's a few people who would really benefit by having their student loans repaid, but then there's a whole bunch of people who, either had student loans and repaid them and don't feel that other people should get that for free, or there's a bunch of people that were contractors or plumbers or whatever, and they didn't get to go to college, and now they're supposed to pay for somebody. So anyway, it's not as popular politically as they would put it out there. And then the other part is that when they're not paying off student loans, the government doesn't have any money. The government would just borrow more money to put out there, and obviously inflation is already a problem. So now this may, from a personal perspective, if you're thinking about joining the military, if you're thinking about working perhaps in some sort of health care or some sort of education, and they have a program to have some sort of student loan forgiveness where essentially your employer pays it off, man, that might definitely affect my decision. So I'm not against the free money, but again, I don't necessarily want to give up my freedom having to take a job with somebody that maybe I wouldn't normally do because I want to get my student loans paid off. But anyway, tough call. Just don't overdo it. Home equity loan. Yep. Kind of similar to taking a loan against a 401k in my mind. I would go with the 401k loan before I would do this. But in a home equity loan, in essence, you're borrowing against the equity in your home. So let's say you've got a home that you paid $400,000 for. It's appreciated in value, so maybe it's worth $500,000. So you've got $100,000 in equity, or maybe you had it for a while and you've made payments and you've got whatever. Somehow you've got equity in that house you can borrow against it. Now these loans are supposed to be for real estate uses. So, and the reason why you might want to do this is because this is a secured loan. Essentially, they'll take your house if you don't pay it. So the lender's in pretty good shape. So the interest rate's going to be pretty low. And then since it's, again, a real estate loan rather than a strictly personal loan, the mortgage interest is going to be tax deductible. So pretty popular. Yeah, tax deductible up to $100,000. Got to shop the rates, see what the rates are, but the rates should be lower because it's secured. I mean, they can literally take your house if you flake out on the loan. This is a sort of like a second mortgage. Payday loans, okay, things have gone horribly wrong. Your life is not well. You obviously didn't take this course, you didn't pay attention, and so again, people can end up in weird situations. You know, good people can have bad things happen to them. So, but the rates charged on payday loans, title loans, all this other stuff, they're going to be confiscatory. They are going to be huge loan sharking kind of stuff. And they'll work it out to where it's, oh, no, this is actually, the interest rate isn't illegal, because that's what they call it. It's usury. There are limits, legal limits on the amount of interest rates they can charge, but there'll be some weasel type maneuver where, oh, no, that's not an interest rate, that's a something fee or whatever cost. And anyway, don't do this. Find out a way to do it. I mean, when they're putting credit card, which I've told you is not a good idea, but believe it or not, it's a better idea than a short-term loan. But yeah, these are not your friends. This is, kind of like a pawn shop type thing. So that was all fairly negative. Those types of loans we were talking about there were you're doing some damage to your finances, but you needed a vehicle, you needed a whatever. But here in a home, now we're looking at an asset that's appreciating, an asset that's going up in value, as opposed to a vehicle or something else that's going down in value. So you're incentivized to try and control a larger asset, because that inflation is now your friend. Again, that's with this situation. High inflation, yeah, it's not good for a poor person. It's not good for somebody who's spending money, but for somebody who's got some mortgages out there at a low interest rate, giddy up. I love inflation, because it makes the amount of money I got to pay back almost insignificant in the future. It's horrible for Joe Sixpack. It's horrible for the greater economy. It's horrible for other investments. But in terms of the mortgages, it's the greatest thing ever. So anyway, buying a home, 10-20% down. 30-year fixed is kind of the standard and kind of the optimum, what you're typically looking for. And now these numbers, this is where you'd like to see these numbers, but it is what it is. If you're living in some huge, San Francisco kind of area, these numbers are completely skewed. Alaska is kind of a neutral sort of market. There's some really speculative markets, Phoenix and Miami and Las Vegas and stuff like that. Prices in Anchorage and Alaska in general are more normalized, not as much. But anyway, the way to figure out what you can afford is pick your mortgage broker. Typically, one of the local ones is good. Go in there and get pre-approved, and you'll pay $50 for your credit report, but you'll have a pre-approval letter, and then you can actually look at a home, and they will tell you what you can afford. So that's the only way you're going to be able to buy a house. If you go out and just say, I want to look at homes, and you expect some real estate agent to start selling them to you or showing you, you're wasting his time or her time, and you're not going to get a good agent, because a good agent won't do that. They only want to go out with somebody who's serious,
got a pre-approval letter. Because if you don't know what you can afford, why bother? You go look at some home. Oh, we're ready to make an offer, and then find out that your credit's garbage, or your credit's way better than you thought, and you can afford way much, something far better. And so now you're not even interested in the home that they showed you. So nobody's going to do that. There's a whole lot of real estate people out there, but only 5% are worth your time, that are good. And the good ones are not going to avail themselves to people that, aren't serious about it. So anyway, affordable down payment. So yeah, assets, closing cost. Yep. And there's a whole bunch of other expenses when you move into a home. And, between Home Depot and Lowe's and the other places where you're buying garden hoses and towel racks, and just, it's going to add up in a hurry. Affordable monthly payments. Yeah. So there's a certain point where, again, I'm very aggressive when it comes to real estate. I try to control as much real estate as I can because it's an appreciating asset. And if I can get a loan for less money, I will. So they call, people like me sort of house poor or whatever, where you've got a fair amount of money, but it's all tied up in real estate. I'm fairly comfortable with that. Other people, not so much. So it depends on your own. Don't go for the maximum you afford. So right off, they're different than I am. Don't buy above what you can afford. Kind of the same thing. Home values don't always rise over time. No, but compared to other commodities, they're pretty damn stable. Yeah, current conditions and job security, certainly. So it's that first home, trying to get your foot in the door, trying to get in the market. And then, every other home subsequent to that should be a little easier, because now it's only an incremental difference. It's getting that initial home. Compare the cost of buying versus renting. One of the things that, for me, I'm not, whatever. I've got tenants in, a property, a couple of properties I have, and fair enough, and they pay their rent. But if you're renting, when you're looking at a cost, say, if you're buying a home, and let's say it's going to cost you, $2,500 a month to buy a home, and your rent's $2,000, you could save, $500 a month by renting. Well, there's a lot more to it than that. Number one, that $2,500 a month for your home payment, it's going to be that amount forever. Well, for the next 30 years. It's not going to increase. Whereas that rent is going to be going up with inflation. Then there are also some benefits to buying a home in terms of taxes. That $2,500, a big chunk of that, like I said, probably over $2,000 of that is going to be interest that's going to be tax deductible. Now, you are going to have to pay property taxes. You're going to have other home ownership expenses. But for me, I've always had animals, dogs, horses, stuff like that. So renting is kind of a non-starter. I haven't been in that situation in a long time. But when you compare the cost of buying versus renting, it's not a simple, there's not just a couple numbers that go into it. There's a whole host of things that we'll talk about. Condominium, not a fan of condominiums, not one bit. I do have a real estate license, although it's lapsed, but one of the problems, particularly here in Alaska, is that it's quite common for condominium associations to have some sort of covenant where only a certain number of their units can be rented. And let's say you're in a situation, you own a condominium, right? And you need to sell it. Well, the market's kind of soft, so you prefer just to rent it. You may not be able to rent it because that condominium complex may already have their maximum number of rentals available. So now you're going to have to sell it for a lesser price in a soft market. That doesn't happen with homes. Homes, you always have the option of renting, buying. You don't have that. I'm not a fan of HOAs either. Homeowner associations. Again, in some situations they have their advantages, but for the most part, I don't want some sort of big brother driving my moves. But in a condominium, you own what they say from the paint inwards. You own everything within the structure, the carpet, obviously all your items, the interior walls, all that kind of stuff. But the actual building, the common areas, that's owned by the condominium association. So, a different setup. Real estate agent, I'd almost always use one, not only because I was one, but when you're buying, the expense is paid by the seller. The commission is a seller's expense, so it's like 6%. It's a significant amount, but it's not your cost. So you don't pay as the buyer, so it's kind of a no-brainer. It's an extra, hopefully informed opinion. Keep you from buying in an avalanche zone or a zone that's perpetually shady here in Alaska or something like that. Or somebody who, it's just somebody who does this on a regular basis. And, I think in most cases it's pretty good. Online realtor services and the whole online thing and lower cost real estate, that may come in a certain length of time, but it's not quite here yet. Travel agents and bank tellers and all that stuff, they're never going away, and they pretty much have gone away. Most of the time, between ATMs and online banking, there's not nearly as many bank staff as there once were, and travel agents are very few. Most people just book their own stuff online. So real estate may go that way, but it's not there yet. Criteria to select, yep. So there's a lot of these things where you're saying, well, I don't have kids, so I don't care about the school system. You need to buy things with the mind that you're going to be selling at some point. And so other people who would be potential buyers of your home down the road, because you're going to probably try and upgrade here, are going to be interested in that. So homeowners associations, sometimes some have some really... I had a friend who was a tree counter. He would go around to people's yards in the dead of winter, and their homeowners association required that they have 3 trees. And if they didn't, they would assess them a fine. Now, anyway, I'm not somebody who likes that. If I happen to have a trailer parked in the yard for a day or two, I don't want to get a fine over that. But again, if you're living someplace and somebody paints their house, purple and has trailers and dogs all over their yard for years and years, you see the value of the homeowners association. So it's like everything else. There's always trade-offs. For me, though, I try to get more land to where neighbors aren't really an issue. But the location, they talk about convenient location, but location is the primary thing for real estate purchases in my mind. I've been lucky enough to buy a waterfront, but the same would be true on next to a green space or next to a, say a golf course or something like that. And the downside to that would be next to a highway or next to a, crime area. Location is important. So, market analysis, quite easy to do if you're looking in like some sort of subdivision or something, because there's comparable sales. If you're buying raw land, any property I bought recently, there no way can they value it because there's no comparable sales. They can't look at previous sales and go, oh, okay, this is what the market's. There's nobody buying 300-acre parcels, in the area. That just doesn't happen. So, but for other appraisals, it can be quite accurate. I've got a friend who's a real estate person who I lost a tremendous amount of respect for because I was looking at selling one of my homes and he just calculated the square feet, gave me the price per square foot, and told me that's what it's worth. It sits on a 2-acre lot. A house that sits on, a zero lot line home with no acreage. I mean, what's the neighborhood like? There's so many other factors than just square footage. So I really don't like when they just give you a factor based upon square footage. You'll see some homes that are, have tons of square footage, but it's not even usable space. So life isn't that simple. Economic. Yeah, we could be. Right now, it's crazy because interest rates are high, which means that it's tough to buy a home, but it also means that homes are not selling for as much as they would. If interest rates drop significantly, home prices are going to go way up because there'll be more people in the market. So one of my daughters just bought a new home, and it was tough, because of the high interest rates. But now she's in it, and they can refinance when the rates go down. Because when the rates go down, she can get her payment down lower, and she wouldn't be able to get in the market at that point, say a year from now, if the rates are significantly lower, because the price would be significantly higher. So a lot of moving parts, like everything else. Yep, so that's what they're trying to say here. It's all supply and demand. Everything in economics, supply and demand. Financial crisis. They were talking about the 2008 one. There's always financial crises. We're on the verge of something. But in some markets, you'll see prices drop significantly. But, oh my God, if prices drop by 3% or 5% in real estate, it's the end of the world. The stock market drops by 30%, and yeah, it's a correction. So real estate is pretty secure compared to other things. And in most markets, it's pretty secure. Business zoning laws, yeah. Again, two-edged sword. Open zoning can give you some good options, or it can end up with a trailer park next to your home. Brokers represent sellers. Yeah. You should have your own agent. Dual agency where somebody represents the buyer and the seller. They can't rarely represent either. So negotiating a price. It's a crazy market out there. You have to know the market. Sometimes homes go for more than their asking price. There's nothing wrong with, if it is, I've always offered less because I haven't been involved in bidding wars and silly markets. But yeah, it's a fine line. If you go too low, you insult the buyer and they're, not going to negotiate much. But if you go $5 or $10 off, most buyers would do it. The other thing with this is, let's say I'm selling a home for $400,000 and I get two offers. I get a full price offer from somebody who's not pre-approved. They don't have a pre-approved letter, meaning they haven't talked to a lender yet. And I get an offer for $390,000 from somebody that's already pre-approved from the loan. I'm taking the $390 right then, because if I accept that other offer for $400,000, am I going to get it? I'm going to have to take the house off the market for a while this, jerk runs his credit, figure that out, and then if he can't get the credit, backs out of the loan, I've lost, a few months, so I had to pay another $4,000 or $5,000 of mortgage payments, and now the house has got to go back on the market. and I turn down this 390 offer, I'll probably accept somebody else's 390 offer in the future. So anyway, if you want to be serious and competitive, have your ducks lined up. My daughter, when she bought this home, because I've got a decent relationship with one of the lenders in town, he was able to get her loan done in 2 weeks. So she put that in the contract, a 2-week loan process, which is phenomenal. That made a huge difference. It made, her offer much more competitive than the other guys because, me as the seller, this person has got good credit, has got, a loan that can be knocked out in 2 weeks. And so it put her in a competitive position. So anyway, down payment, we talked about this. Different ways, VA, obviously you don't need to put down a down payment for the most part, but if you're a veteran or not. PMI, it's not the end of the world. I did this one time before. It was, again, military. I was down in Las Vegas. Market was exploding. So I jumped in on a home and didn't have the down payment because it was outside of the VA limits at that point. It was a pretty good size home. And anyway, because the market was exploding, I couldn't put down the 20%. So I put down less and then had to pay a private mortgage insurance. And it was like $200 a year or $200 a month in addition to the mortgage. But I only paid it for, I think, 3 months because the market was going up so fast. I had the house reappraised. The house appraised for like 50 grand more than we paid for it. And then, because I had equity, I had greater than the 20%. I no longer had to pay the mortgage or the PMI. So we canceled the PMI. So if you're going to pay PMI for the extent of the loan, that would be a problem. But typically you don't, because you should either be making your payments or making, above the payments and getting above that 20% magic number. Once you get above that number, that requirement for you goes away. Closing costs, it ends up being about 10 grand all in. Obviously, they're higher for the seller because the seller's got to pay a commission. But there's all these little fees and title searches and home inspections and yada yada. Well, buying a home, it's kind of pricey. Fixed rate. I've had variable rates. I did that in Europe, and the interest rate was super competitive, quite a bit lower. It's kind of a gut check, but I only had that. I just went with a 10-year mortgage, not something they do in the States very often, but I wanted to get that house done and paid for, and it was going to be an income property. So it's had tenants in it for, 15 years now, and it was paid off in 10. So anyway, typically though, a fixed rate mortgage that means that the payment stays the same for the entirety of the loan. Can't be a good thing. When rates are expected to rise. So there may be a situation right now where the only way you can afford the home is to take this variable interest rate. They're not as popular anymore because it kind of led to some downfalls back in the, whatever they're calling that economic slowdown in 2007, 2008, the great whatever. Anyway, it is a gut check because those rates could go up. Pardon me. Amortization table just means how the payments are going to be paid back. So this is what I was talking about, where a whole bunch of interest up. Well, the payment's going to be the same. Principal, they're only paying $120, but they're paying $417 in interest. Here, by the end of the loan, that's the end of the 30 years, $3 in interest, $534 in principal. So granted, this is just for 100 grand, but this 417 that's all tax deductible. 120, that's not. By the end of the loan, only $3 is tax deductible, and 534 is just in principal. This is kind of artificial, 100 grand. You're not going to, this should just be looked at an increment. a $500,000 home is going to be 5 times that, so 2,000 something of interest. Go figure. The larger amount, the larger the payment. The larger the interest rate, the larger the payment. Certainly. So, like we said. So, we're showing this for all types of learners. Visual learners, this is how much interest you're paying. So, a whole bunch. Yep, stretch things out, but typically 30 is, I've never seen mortgages go over 30 years in the States. Very common are 15-year mortgages, and some people really want to do that. I'm not one of those guys. If I've got a cheap loan, I want to delay paying it back as long as possible. I'm renting their money for far less, than I'm making on it. But if I was kind of inclined to do a 15-year mortgage, I still wouldn't do it. What I'd do is I'd get a 30-year mortgage and just increase the amount of payments on it. So, put an extra $100 or $200 or whatever towards the principal every month. You can do that with mortgage companies, and then your loan would get paid off. You could check and see what it takes to get your 30-year mortgage paid off in 15 years, and just increase your monthly payment, pay down the principal quicker, and be done with it. If that's what your goal is. The reason I would do that is, you always want to plan for the best case, but be prepared for the worst case. So if, lose your job, lose your whatever, all of a sudden that 15-year mortgage payment is high, you're not locked into it. If you've got a 30-year mortgage, you just quit paying that additional payment and drop back to the regular amount. If you're obligated on a 15-year mortgage, you're obligated. So I like the flexibility of taking a 30-year, and if I want to pay more and pay it off quicker. But if you get a loan, whatever. I don't mean to pull the boomer card, but if you can get a loan for less than 3%, and you've already got that established, I am in no hurry to pay that thing off. Financing with fixed rate. Yep. So 5% interest. So again, this is just a $100,000 amount. Yeah, the websites are quite useful because they also will calculate taxes and insurance, which a lot of people kind of forget. It's more than just paying off the house. Your lender will require that you have insurance on it. It's a fixed cost, and you'll also obviously have to pay the property taxes on it. So the all-in rate is what you're interested in. And bankrate.com, yeah, just one of the people out there that will quote you rates. So the reason why people can't afford houses right now, you're talking the same $100,000, but at a 4% rate, you can see that payment's not quite doubled, but it's significantly. The amount of people who can swing a 4% interest rate, and literally, a lot of folks were fortunate enough to get in at 2.85 or whatever a few years ago. I just took out a real estate loan for 3.5%. Granted, I got to run pigs on it, but hey, I can do that. I like pigs. But it's a real estate loan at 3.5% when you're expecting the market on real estate to appreciate faster than that. You're making money just by holding it. So anyway, here's a 30-year and a 15-year. But again, you can get a 30-year and pay whatever the number is, say a few $100s more a month, and essentially pay that off in a 15-year. So adjustable rate mortgages, we discussed that. Those are, again, a variable interest rate. They're tied to, some indice. So, say inflation goes up by, 8% or something, your mortgage rate is going to go up, but there's going to be a cap associated with it. So you really got to read the fine print. It's going to be more complex. It's going to be a little riskier, but the rate is typically going to be lower. If you're doing something like this, I would consider that more a temporary situation, and you're anticipating rates are going to go lower, and you're going to refinance and hopefully get into a fixed rate mortgage as soon as you can. So that's the cap, the amount of that fluctuation. It could result in a fairly painful situation if inflation were to continue to go up. But as long as it's not going to max you out, as long as you aren't going to get foreclosed on, it might be a risk you're willing to take. So the owner versus renting. Yeah. For me, for quality of life, I'm going to own. But if you're somebody who's going to be moving pretty quickly or other things, but yeah, owning, there are more expenses involved. Now, granted, you're paying that for the renter. But I've had tenants, in my German home. I had the same tenant he was a high school principal in Germany, and the guy, he paid off my home. I had a 10-year loan, and I was only in it, I think, a year or so before I turned it into a rental, and I was cash positive almost, meaning that my rental payment almost matched the mortgage. And at the end of 10 years, I had a huge home to show for it, and he had nothing but rent receipts. So, different types of mortgages. A lot of these are out of fashion after loan requirements have gotten more severe post 2007, 2008. Interest-only mortgages, where that's essentially kind of what most loans end up being. They're typically not that popular because pretty much all mortgages are interest only. That's the way it works out. Mortgage financing, refinancing, huge. So now the rates have got to drop a little bit. You don't do this over 0.5%, but this is where it helps to have a good relationship with a local loan person. There's a number of good companies, and if you've got a friend in that business, because they will make some money when you refinance. There's certain commissions and expenses they're going to get, so they're sort of incentivized to make you churn a little bit to get you to refinance often. If you have a friend who is looking at a more of a long-term relationship with you, they're not going to burn you like that. They're not going to, screw you to refinance when it's only a 0.5% difference. They're going to say, no, this makes financial sense for you. You can get in at, say, 1.5% or 2% less, and so you should refinance. So, one of my loans, it was at 4%, which is not a bad loan, but I eventually was able to get that refinance down at like 2.75, and but yeah, you should always be looking, if you've got a less than optimum interest rate, when it makes sense to get refinanced. And that's it. Okay, so I'll put that out there. I'll get you've got the homework assignments that are already out there. Start getting ready for the midterm. Like I say, I'll put out the study guide. Don't sweat that too much. If you watch that study video a few times and concentrate on the things I talk about, you'll do quite well. Until next week.